Hello and welcome to the Sanctuary, a safe space to speak from the heart. I'm your host, Israel, and my guest today is super talented artist, Steeves. Welcome to the Sanctuary.
Thanks, Israel. It's lovely to be here.
Sweet. So, how's your week? How was your weekend, actually? Let's start with that.
Admittedly, I think it was probably a little bit tough. Like a mixture of tough and good. Like we're sort of coming out of the dead of winter into spring a little bit, and I find the extra light and the warmer weather is a treat for sure. And I super appreciate that. I think the lockdown in Nova Scotia, which we're not super accustomed to because we've had it so great here, is a little bit tough. For sure, emotionally and mentally and physically. So I think it was a bit of a bump on the log this weekend, kind of just trying my best to get caught up on all the stuff I didn't manage to get done during the week, which isn't ideal because you're supposed to sort of be resting and taking care of other things on the weekend. But I find my productivity has severely suffered this year. I've both like set higher standards for myself and accomplished more at the same time as like acknowledging that I am not getting as much done in the same time frame as I used to, and I keep trying to coach myself out of that, but it's probably not possible, and I kind of just have to accept that like not usual standards will be the forward for a little bit, and that's okay. That's fine.
Right. I mean, not usual standards being the norm is actually normal because we are going through something that's not usual, right?
Yeah.
And COVID. So kind of it's a year now.
I mean, it's more than a year.
So, but like last year, the very first time, March 2020, it happened. What are some of the things that got cancelled on your end because of that very first lockdown?
Well, a really big thing happened that I was super excited about, and it was so at NSCAD University, Nova Scotia College of Art and Design. There's a department called Extended Studies, and Extended Studies is essentially a department that provides art programming for the community. So you don't need to be enrolled in the school in order to engage, and it brings in a lot of really cool artists and facilitators with a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience, and there's some really cool programming. And I would often be involved as a teacher or facilitator with the youth programming, and so I was teaching a couple art classes on Saturdays to 8 to 10-year-olds. And then we were gearing up. I had been hired as the coordinator for like a huge March break art camp. And we had done a lot of work for it, and we were really excited. And March break camps with kids were always, and every time that I had participated previously, literally just so much work, so much chaos, and so much fun. You know what I mean? Like it was always really rewarding. So to get to be the coordinator, and to have been hired by people I really admired to do that was really exciting. And it was a challenge, and I was really looking forward to it. But of course, we had to think about having a whole bunch of little kids together in a small space. But we didn't have a ton of knowledge about sort of COVID. We were sort of scooping up information as we went. So we were all super concerned. And I think it was the day before or 2 days before that sort of the plug was pulled on March break camp, which I know was really hard on the kids and on parents. And we were also super disappointed, but also relieved. Because I distinctly, I remember us saying like how before we knew that it was like aerosol spread, when we thought that it was maybe more by contact or by germs and things like that, even then we were sort of thinking like, how do you keep kids from age like 5 to 12, let's say, from touching their nose and then a table and then each other, like, kiddos are kiddos.
Right.
And one of her favorite stories to tell was that, you would have a kiddo who would say, "Can I tell you a secret?" And you would bend down to hear their secret, and they would sneeze in your eyeball. And that's like, right? It's like a day in the life of working with kids.
Oh my God.
And it's part of it. And that was definitely, those were sort of like the conversations we were having before we knew about aerosol spread.
Right.
And so I think we were really concerned with sort of like, how do we protect these young people? And also not make it terrifying for them. Mm-hmm. So that was a really interesting week. Like the prep before, as sort of like Canadian media and news were picking up the story, and we were sort of navigating what that meant for us. So that was one thing that was canceled, and our lovely Saturday art classes were canceled, and all with good reason. And then I was also doing sort of, I believe, some other potential facilitation, I think. And that being said, like, this speaks to sort of how fuzzy my memory of this year is. Mm-hmm. I'm really grateful I have a day timer, because I can actually look back at it and be like, you did have things scheduled, because I don't really remember. But yeah, it was a lot of sort of facilitation with MacPhee Center, arts facilitation with NSCAD, extended studies. And I think I was also just sort of gearing up to take a little bit more control of my own life and my self-employment, and my own personal art practice. So I think for a lot of the time that I've been an artist, I haven't been super focused in my art practice, and that's okay. I was figuring out what I wanted to do and kind of trying everything. And I think I was just about to maybe get to a place where I was hitting a stride. And of course that didn't happen. Or sorry, it got interrupted. And then I think it happened in a different way a little bit farther along in the pandemic, sort of once we settled into it. Yeah. And so it's kind of sad, but also totally necessary. And I'm glad that nobody got sick or hurt because we didn't make those decisions. Right. But of course you always look back and you wonder what it would have been like. And as I'm sure we're all doing.
Yeah. I mean, I can't even imagine, because it's something you're really looking forward to and preparing for, and then that happened. But right, you also have to look at the other side that going through with it might have been worse. But thankfully everyone is okay. But like, let's talk about art though. How did you fall? How did you fall in love with art? How did you fall in love with painting and coloring and all these things?
I don't know. God, I would say there's probably multiple stages in my life where it got reaffirmed, or I don't quite know what the language would be to use, but I would say without a doubt it would be my parents. And I'm like choking up. What a goof. Yeah, my parents have always supported me to be creative. And maybe I would suspect that they knew that creativity was good for me before I knew it, if that makes any sense. So, and I mean, I say this like every birthday, every Easter would be new art supplies. Or like any time that they went to a museum, they would scoop up art supplies from the gift shop, and would always take me to see art. Like, it was music and art and theater and culture were really, really, really supported. And beloved in my house. But what was interesting was that both of my parents were scientists. So like dad was a family doctor, and mom was a nurse.
Wow.
Yeah. And both really creative outside of their careers. So dad has been a drummer for his whole life. And my mom has been, I mean, there's no end to the list of her, to listing her creative abilities, but like everything from, making a home a beautiful space to be in, to like growing flowers and arranging flowers, and like a chef, and then a seamstress, and she made her clothes and she gave us haircuts, and then on top of that, like she would decide that she wanted to paint a mural on the floor, you know, on the stairs and things. Like, just really, really, really cool. Really, really, really creative. But without ever having any formal training. So like a little bit fearless in that way. I don't think she ever thought of herself as an artist that way, but definitely she was. And then Dad similarly with music. And I think that the creative sides of their life fulfilled them so much that they wanted that for me. And I think before I was probably aware of it, they would see my reaction to art and creativity. Because I tried to walk away so many times.
Why?
I think it was hard for me. Lots of people can do it very well. For me, it's been very hard tying creativity to income.
Oh.
Very difficult. Very, very difficult. I don't think it's a bad thing for me. Like, I don't think it's something that because it's hard for me, I should stop trying to do. I find I get better and better with it, with age and experience and learning. Admittedly, I'm still really bad at it, but I get better at it. There were so many times where I said, like, I don't want to do this for a living anymore. I just don't think, it's just so much pressure. It's so hard. And a lot of my work is very personal. So to be trying to like pull personal work out of yourself to pay the rent or pay a mortgage or to pay the bills, whatever, it's it's hard, you know.
Fair
and
enough.
then there's a lot of people who do it really well and speak to it and are really knowledgeable about it, and I'm just not there yet. So I tried many times to quit, and I even told them many times, I was like, man, like, how did you let me go to university to be an artist? Like, how did you do it? Like, why did you do that? And you know, their answer is always, we don't think you would have been happy doing anything else. And I think that's partly true.
Do you think you're correct when they say that?
I don't know. I find it hard to answer that question.
Okay.
Sometimes I wish that I had a really, really comfortable, well-paying job with awesome benefits that you knew you felt safe in, and that didn't suck your soul away every day. But I also feel like I may be describing a unicorn. So, like, you know, it's everybody's...
I was what is the job she's talking about?
Like, I don't know that exists, right? I mean, I'm sure it does for some people. But working to live right now is hard, and I think it's been hard for a long time. And so I think that it could be a thing where I'm saying the grass is greener on the other side, because I've been very fortunate and very lucky in the opportunities that I've had, and the support that I've had, and the community of people who support me in my work. So, you know, if I had gone, I often tell Dad, I'm like, I'm going to pack this in, and I'm going to go to school, and I'm going to become an accountant, because then I'm going to have a reliable income, and then I'll also be able to do my own taxes and not worry about it. And he's, you know, there's at no point did they tell me, you know, that's a bad idea or anything like that. But I don't know for sure that I would be happy in that respect either. If I was really struggling, I think that would be a good idea, because I think that not having enough to live is really, really, really hard, and it devours you, right? So, but I'm okay right now, so we'll just sort of keep focusing on my art and teaching, and I think that's what sort of like saved me from walking away from making art.
Teaching?
It really brought the love back for me. And I fell in it completely accidentally. So, but it absolutely reinvigorates and reignites, I guess, my own passion for making. And I think I see reflected back to me what art means to me when I'm encouraging and supporting my students. So it makes it exciting and worthwhile again. And it's probably something as basic as like being reminded of why it's meaningful and helpful to me, instead of getting stuck in the day-to-day cobwebs of why it's hard, which like, I'm a pessimist. without a doubt, my whole life, worrywart, pessimist. It's very hard for me to focus on the positive side of things, and that is an active practice that I need to engage in every day. So I think teaching really was that for me, and it's there's something magical seeing art, seeing others be creative, and seeing them be creative because you've supported them in that. That's pretty cool. And so that brings me back to sort of my desk every day in a way that I didn't have prior to teaching. So that I think changed a lot for me. And I didn't even know it was there. I would have never known that I enjoyed being a teacher at all had it not sort of happened accidentally.
Okay. So how did it happen? How did you get into teaching?
So I was asked to, because of my work in comics, I was approached by the MacPhee Center in downtown Dartmouth, which is a creative learning center for youth. I believe the ages are 11 or 12 to 19. And they approached me to team up with them and Avalon Sexual Assault Center to create a creative program where, using comics and illustration and art, program participants, the youth, would explore and learn about topics such as gender and healthy relationships, consent. It was really cool. I forget what we initially called the program, but it eventually became known as Crash. And we ended up...
What does Crash mean?
That's a very good question. I should have looked that up before I did this. It's CC... It's the way we used to spell it was CCC-RASH.
Oh.
You know what? I can't remember. I'll have to look it up. It was a few years ago.
Right.
But it was a super neat program, and we ended up packaging it and so that we could provide it for other educators to run in their classrooms or with their youth. So it was really, really neat. It was really cool. I learned a lot about myself in the process. Initially, we ended up traveling with the program, so we ended up going to a few different communities in Cape Breton to run it at first, and then we ran it here at a few different locations in HRM, which was really cool. And then it's since been packaged up and sort of like passed on, which is really neat that the work could sort of, sort of the original program facilitators could become obsolete, and it could be sort of passed on to others, which is really neat. And that's always a cool thing as well, when you don't need to sort of own something in a proprietary way. And so that was sort of the beginning of my facilitation and my arts facilitation with MacPhee. And then as I started to discover how just much I really enjoyed that type of work, I spoke to a friend who worked with NSCAD Extended Studies.
Right. And
I asked their advice if they thought I had a really low self-esteem about it. So I asked them what they thought, if I could even do it. And I suspect that they thought I was a little silly for asking that question, because they were just sort of like, yeah, absolutely, of course. Let me put you in contact with the people. And so they did. And so they put me in contact with another good friend of mine who worked there at the time. And I believe very quickly I was brought in to start teaching some summer or March break camps about comics. And then I taught, watercolor comics or just general sort of diary style journaling, sketchbook type things. It was great. It was really, really great.
And then the comics, how did those ones happen? How did that start?
That's a good question. I don't know how it started exactly. I've always loved comics ever since I was a kid. I didn't read necessarily superhero comics, I don't think. I didn't have a lot of access to those. But my parents and friends and I gave each other and read a lot of Garfield and Calvin and Hobbes.
Oh my God, I love Calvin and Hobbes.
Right, Calvin and Hobbes is really special.
He's imagining the tiger is alive, right?
Well, yeah. So I can't remember if Bill Watterson, the cartoonist behind Calvin and Hobbes, I can't remember if he actually ever explicitly states that Hobbes is a teddy bear that Calvin sees as a live living tiger. And I think that's part of the magic, at least for me as a kid, that was, because I sort of could still pick up on the fact that the adults saw a teddy bear or a plush tiger. But I was still very much on Calvin's side that Hobbes was alive. And I think I thought that way for a really long time. And I think that maybe if Bill Watterson never, explicitly said like Calvin's imagining this because he's a child, because I think he never really did. I think that's sort of what held the magic together. Right. And also, Calvin was such an interesting kid, Bill Watterson gave kids a lot of credit in that Calvin had a very adult voice sometimes, but he also still had a kid's lens through how he viewed everything. And yeah, there was like this simultaneous respect and disregard for parents, which was so childlike as well, which was really interesting. Right. So I think I can't say for sure because I tend not to read a lot of interviews by creators that I like, and I don't know why. There's no good reason for it. I just love being immersed in the art more than about the art, but that's not always a good thing. So I don't necessarily recommend that. But there's a lot of like Bill Watterson is quite introverted and is notorious for not doing interviews or being a public figure. And so I think that sort of like he not explicitly stating that stuff and not like pulling away the magic of that sort of giving the double viewpoint of the child perspective and the adult perspective all the time enabled his comic to be received by so many people simultaneously. And I still go back and reread Calvin and Hobbes, and it's so funny because I get so much out of the comics now that I didn't get when I was younger, and vice versa. And so I think that he had a really, really special understanding of age and differing perspectives and how you change and shift, but also how things can be very similar. And I think that there was a huge amount of respect given to both kids and parents in those comics in a really interesting way. And so I distinctly remember Garfield and Calvin and Hobbes being around all the time. And then also I remember sort of like the I don't know if I even should admit this. But, there's the newspaper comics, which were really special. And I would love reading the newspaper comics and the Saturday color comics. I remember if we didn't get the paper, then my grandmother would cut out my favorite colored comics for me and save them for me. Nice. But also, my parents had a subscription for The New Yorker growing up. And I couldn't obviously really get into the articles as a kid because those were not necessarily, a kid's speed. But what was really funny is I was super fascinated by a few cartoonists in The New Yorker. And one was sort of one of their most famous cartoonists, which was Booth, who has since passed on, I believe. But he drew a dog and a man in this certain way. And this dog and this man would appear in these comics all the time. And this dog was like, he was just hysterical to me. And he didn't do anything. He kind of just had like a funny look on his face and a funny way of sitting. But as a kid, I just thought that was the best comic in the world. And so I would race to read these New Yorker comics that like I would never understand because they were for grown-ups. So like they always went way over my head. Right. But I just thought there was something about it that I just thought was the bee's knees. So it was that, the New Yorker comics, and the advertisements along the sides of the New Yorker, which were very kind of dated. Like a lot of them were really old school looking and they looked so unfamiliar to me. And I think like maybe they were very American or like American media and just looked very different than anything I had really seen or that other stuff that I'd seen sort of around our house. So I was super fascinated by it because there would be, I don't know any graphic designer could tell you, but it's like those really tiny squished advertisements along the sides of sort of New Yorker articles. And they could be just so rough. But what was so funny is there would be some really consistent ones. Like the same jeweler would have the same advertisement every single week. Or like, I think there was a guy or like a company that would sell berets that had the same photo of the same guy in his like 50s wearing the same beret for like 20 years in the New Yorker. And that stuff just like super fascinated me. And I was weirdly into that in a funny way. So those were sort of the comics that influenced me. And I had, mom and dad who were always pushing me to express myself in any way that I felt fit. But also I had a teacher, Josette Frizzle, and it was grade 5. And it was in her class that I first started making comics. And she was super formative for me and a whole bunch of other youth in the class, because we were a French immersion class, which meant that we were from the grade primary, so the age of 5, all the way through to grade 12. We had the same group of kids, like the same cohort. Our class was never mixed with other classes because there was only sort of one French immersion class per year. And so we got pretty close. And on top of that, we were all pretty weird and pretty eccentric kiddos. And we all came from also some pretty eccentric parents. And I think it's pretty well known that French immersion, that like cohort being stuck together for so many years, does create an acceptance of weird and differentness. And so you can end up with some like really interesting youth, with some just, who are very comfortable with themselves. And amongst their friends. And so what was really interesting is that French immersion classes can be a lot to handle because of that, because they are a unit, and they are hard to separate and manage. And I've heard this from a lot of teachers over the years who teach French immersion kids. And we would have this yelled to us frequently in junior high by our junior high teachers who could not handle us. And they would always say, like, you French immersion kids. And we'd be like, and? But in grade 5, Josette was having a really hard time because there was a lot of creative kids in our class. And we would just ignore your lesson, and we would draw or start cutting things out and doing a collage, or decide we want to take out our watercolors and start painting. Like, we did not care, apparently. And I don't fully remember this, but I remember it being reported back to me. But what I do recall is that she decided that she had to do something about this because she was losing us. We were not present. We were doing our own thing. Mm-hmm. And so she made a deal with us, straight up negotiated with these 9-year-olds. And she said, if you can put away your creative projects during school time, like while we're doing a lesson, then on Friday, the whole afternoon is going to be called l'heure créative, or like creative hour. And you bring in a project that you want, or we can have a directed group project, and you work on that. And so essentially she gave us a wide open art class that was self-directed on Fridays, provided that we respected her during lesson plan Monday through Thursday.
Win-win for everybody involved.
It was so successful. It was so successful. Yeah. And what was really funny was that we felt so respected. And that was revolutionary. I mean, to be fair, French immersion, we were so lucky. We had so many good teachers throughout the years. And I think we had, relative to other people, a much higher percentage of really loving, dedicated, self-sacrificing to the point of it being a detriment to them type of teachers, who really got kids who were different. You know, we had a lot of really good teachers who did not try to shove us into boxes. But, you know, Josette was quite an exception who really saw us for who we were and got that, and then was ready to compromise or accommodate us. So long as in turn it came back It was really funny because I have very clear memories of making my first comics in that class.
Yeah.
And they were called Mutt Man and Squear. So Mutt Man was a giant dog, and his sidekick was a square, an orange square, who I called Squear, and I don't really remember why. And they were all based, they were sort of like my parents still have them, but if you reread them now, they're basically a parody of like the Adam West Batman.
Oh.
Yeah. And so I was pretty dedicated to these. There's multiple issues. I thought it was pretty cool.
Right.
And I distinctly remember both my parents telling me, like, we're going to save these because these are going to be worth something someday. Which every parent says, but feels pretty good.
Right.
And so, yeah, that was really cool. That was the beginning. And then I don't think I made comics for like ever after that. But it was really
Why
interesting.
not?
I got really into music. I was in sort of the school band from the age of 9 to grade 12. And I did
What did you play?
Classical flute. And then later on in high school, I added alto saxophone. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And so that was really cool because music was a really big part of my family life as well because Dad was a musician.
Right.
And we would have his band practices would be in our house every week. So it was a big part of life. So that was really cool. So I pursued music pretty for quite some time till grade 12. And I wasn't really sure that I was done with it until I was sort of in my 20s, but and maybe I'm not done with it. Who knows?
Do you still play the saxophone?
What's that?
Do you still play the saxophone?
No, not really. I still have it, but if I feel like connecting with music and creatively in that way, I tend to take out my flute because I do have more of a connection to that, which is interesting. But learning to play saxophone was really special as well. It was very cool. Very, very cool. But yeah, I think it was in university when I was studying, I was doing my BA for English literature. And a close friend and roommate who was in fine arts, kept saying, like, all you do is talk about art. Like, all you do is think about art. All you do is read about art. Do you want to maybe take some art classes? Like, you love photographing. And it's true, I loved photography. And so it was at university that I started taking some art classes. I wasn't a fine arts student fully. I hadn't submitted a portfolio or anything like that. But I just asked sort of every teacher independently for each course, could I join? And I was very lucky because they all said yes, and I don't know that they all should have. But I was very, very lucky in that way. And so I kind of just really slowly started creeping back, and it started with photography, which really fed a part of my soul that I didn't know needed feeding. And photography is still really important to me. But then I wanted to try everything, and I wasn't a fine arts student per se, so I didn't have the foundation years in the same way, where you sort of are given a tour of all the facilities and you try everything. But I did end up taking a few intro painting and intro to drawing courses after my photography courses, and that is sort of what ended up pulling me back. And then I started working as a sort of greeter. We called them deskers, but a receptionist, but front-facing person of the Owens Art Gallery, which is the university art gallery at Mount Allison. And there is probably where I fell in completely, because that was a really special place. I don't think I'll ever forget my time working for Owens Art Gallery. The people who worked there had such an impression on me. And so I started working there as a receptionist, and then I started doing an assistant for what was called Family Sundays with Lucy McDonald, which was a really cool family arts programming where community folks or people from the community, families would come in with their youth, and every month, I believe. I don't know if it was every Sunday or once a month. They would go and they would explore a new exhibit that was up. And then there would be an activity that would cause you to pause, reflect, and then react to the art. And working with the youth and their families through that programming was so cool. And so had like such a huge impression on me. And it started me learning about how to break down the barriers between regular people who don't feel like fine art or art in general is accessible to them. And then these large institutions that we have, like art galleries and museums, that have historically not necessarily been welcoming to large cohorts of people and have been inaccessible to a lot of people. And so this Family Sunday programming was probably some of the things that I first interacted with that taught me about how to break down those barriers and make these spaces accessible to more folk. And it was just amazing. It was just so amazing. And of course, I also in turn ended up learning so much more about art as a result of it, because I was asked to think about it in ways that maybe I hadn't done before. And that was really special. And so while I was working as a receptionist there, we had a lot of free time and we were allowed to work on our schoolwork. And so I would bring my laptop, and instead of working on schoolwork, I would read webcomics. There's a few different ones, but I'm going to pronounce the cartoonist's last names wrong. But there's Jeff Jacks or Jeff Jack, who I don't know if I pronounced the S at the end, who did Questionable Content, which was a webcomic I read for many years, and XKCD, which was another one. And then I would also spend a lot of time on a blog called Wooster Collective, which was, I believe, a husband and wife project based in New York City that documented street art from all over the world. I think initially it started as documenting sort of New York City street art, and just having conversations about street art. And that was the time when all of a sudden I just fell head over heels into comics and street art, and was just madly in love with them both. And I remember the same friend, Megan, who had said, like, you just need to start taking art classes. Like, I think this is what you want to do. And I remember her saying, like, now that you're interested in this stuff and now that you're pursuing this stuff, looking at it, it's like, yeah, of course. It felt like you were always, sort of gunning to go in this direction. But we just didn't know that. And I didn't really, I still remember my parents took me to New York City when I was 9 years old in 1994. And we walked the whole city. That was like the most important thing for them, was that you walk the city and that you get to see a city that's very vibrant and alive and filled with people from all different demographics who are constantly bumping up against each other. And it blew my mind.
Wow.
Like, New York City, as like a little kid from Antigonish, was just like, I was so overwhelmed with like sensory overload, like meltdowns everywhere. But I remember being like unable to get over street art and subways. Just like couldn't stop thinking about them. And that's all I wanted to do was like go and find more of it and go back into the subway, because the subways weren't fully cleaned up yet. Like, it wasn't current Manhattan. They were still like coated with like tagging on the inside. It was starting to get tidied up in the 90s, and I think like that was the era of like seeing a lot of like the gentrification of New York City. But I was just fortunate enough to get like the dregs, and I think for people who were familiar with New York prior to that, it wouldn't have been as magnificent. But for a kiddo who had never been on public transit before, it was just the coolest thing in the world. Right. And to see like, tags on subways, like covering the window, or subway trains covering the windows and stuff. It was just like, to see living art was just so cool, you know? So that really blew me away. And so I think that was sort of the stuff that like slowly, cumulatively got me to where I am now. But at no point did I know what I was doing. And at no point was I being very conscious in my direction. And mostly, you know, like some people are really great at putting their head down and knowing what they want and focusing on it. And I still don't think I'm very good at that. No, everything is interesting. And if I could, I wish I could be an expert and the best at everything. Because it's all fascinating and it's all brilliant. But I'm just one person and we only have one life. So you kind of, as I like am in my 30s, I'm understanding I need to rein myself in a little bit and you make choices. But like everything is interesting. And like making the choices feels awful. And I would love to like never have to focus on one thing and to always be a jack of all trades, master of literally nothing. But that doesn't always work out very well. So I am trying to focus a little bit more now. And it's a little bit easier as I get to know myself a little bit better and age. But like my general artistic career and creative trajectory is very messy and not linear. And none of it was on purpose. It's all very much by accident. And like a series of happy accidents.
Well, like, so, you know, talking about happy accidents, that kind of led you to your Patreon and your daily comic practice?
Weekly. So it should be daily.
Oh my God. Not
no,
daily.
no.
Sorry.
It should be daily. I wish it was daily. I
Okay.
am just really slow and I agonize and I have my own mental health stuff that just really causes me, it takes me a lot longer to do any creative endeavor because, to be totally honest, I have panic attacks like daily. It's a good day if you don't have one. And so I have to take a lot of time as I'm working to be like, you're having a bit of a meltdown. You need to walk away and go sit on the deck and drink a glass of water and do 15 minutes of meditation. And sometimes I can't come back to my desk and I try to, but I can't. So I've sort of been doing a weekly comic practice. And it started, and my intention was for it to be sort of like a journal, like a diary comic, and that's what I call it. But it's probably a little bit more of like a mix of diary / poetry / spiritual, internal, pulling apartishness comic. And in that process, I've sort of been playing with different ways of illustrating the comic with different mediums because I don't really know what I want just yet. So I would like to be doing more of it and not just weekly. I think it would be great if it was multiple times a week because I want to have the experience. I want to like actually have that legwork and that time put into it. But sometimes I take so long to do it anyway at the time it's not going to happen. So I try to put a lot of thought into sort of the words and the meaning and then the write-up for it. But yeah, this has all also been a very happy accident as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess, you know, the ones I've seen, like the ones you show on your Instagram, are really personal. Like, you know, do you think it would be easier if they weren't so personal?
Oh, God, yeah. Without a doubt. Yeah, no, for sure. And there's been other people who have said that too, where they're like, sometimes this seems like it's torturing you. You know, do you want to write about something a little bit easier? And the answer is yes, I do. And then also, I just don't know how. This is just what sort of like comes very naturally to me. And my hope is that I do go on to branch off to make other work as well with comics. But right now, this seems to be what I'm doing. And it's also probably because the pandemic has forced me to be so introspective. Like I don't have the usual excuses or things that enable me to run away from what's making me irritable, or what's making me hard to be around, or what is making me have a hard time being productive, or whatever it is. Those types of things weren't there in the same way. And suddenly I had this opportunity to really like work on myself, because things were really hard. And so I kind of had to, like it was like work on myself or like suffer. And so, I think it's probably just tied into sort of what I have been preoccupied with doing this whole pandemic, which is like managing mental health as best as possible, Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh man. Whenever you share or whenever you answer something, I'm like pulled in, and it's like, oh my god, because everything like branch to another question, and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna focus on this one. But like, I'm gonna end it with this question though. Something that you've mentioned over the course of us just chatting today, and something that shows a lot in your work, is mental health. Why is that important to you?
Okay, full disclosure, I'll probably cry again. I want to say that first so that everyone knows I'm super self-aware of how emotional I am about this. I think it's really important to me because I'm so privileged. I'm so lucky because I've had mental health struggles that have been very challenging. But I think the main reason I'm still here today is because I have a lot of things that other people don't, which is financial support, familial support, partner support, friend support. Because my parents were mental health workers, were healthcare workers, I am sure, I don't have evidence of this, but I am 100% positive that I had access to mental health treatment that others would have found extremely difficult to access. I'm sure I've gotten care that other people who didn't look like me or who weren't from the same background as me would not have gotten. I know that I've been given opportunities after screwing up, also because of my privilege, and we live in a culture that doesn't talk about this stuff, or up until very recently, we haven't been talking about this stuff. And so I am often really surprised that, because like my lens of my life and how I've done is that like I have screwed up a lot and am not necessarily thriving very often, like I am thriving, let's be real. I'm very lucky, and I'm actually very content in my life right now. But like I don't think I don't want people to think that I am totally okay and have it all together, and I don't want anyone to think that I've always been okay and had it together. Largely because social media, like we all know, it presents a certain lens, and it's often a very glossy lens. But I, even just in day to day, the way that I present myself usually with friends and things is quite, if you see me in person, I do often try to be, I think like friendly and open and happy, even if I'm in like depths of despair. It's very hard for me to wear that necessarily on my sleeve with people. I can always talk about it later, but in the moment, it's very hard for me to be honest about. And so I really don't want people to think that I got through this or I'm not on the other side of it, but just, I don't want people to think that I'm managing just all on my own, or that if they're struggling or having, really suffering, that their own fault, or that, they're to blame. Like we live in such an imperfect system. And the whole thing needs to be thrown out, and rebuilt. And I really do think that the only reason I'm here right now is because I'm so fortunate and so privileged. And then on top of all my privilege, I have like a lot of just pure luck. That I'm sure if we have to follow the thread is also privilege. It's just I don't know how to follow the thread and pull that apart yet. And so I think it's really important to talk about this stuff and be honest. And not that everybody has to. Sorry, I think it's important for me because I am somebody who wears sort of my life on my sleeve in a lot of ways. I do try to be genuine with people. But I want people to know that it can be really hard, and that can also be okay, and I also want people to know that it's really important to ask for help, and also to know that even when you ask, there's a lot of people who won't get it, and that just fucking sucks. And so I try to talk about it a lot to, at the very least, destigmatize and demystify as much as I'm able to as an artist, right? Like I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not an art therapist. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I'm an art teacher who can, in how I support my students in their making of art or in their creativity, I can help them sometimes gain a sense of self. But there is a limit to what I can do. And so we do need to have these conversations about what people need. And it's different for different people in different communities, and how we can provide this stuff. And so, there's a lot of people out there having really, really amazing conversations about this. And I don't think I should be looked to as an authority. I am just trying to sort of share my own experience. If that helps anyone else ask for help or feel less ostracized or alone or less of a failure, then that would be awesome. That would be really cool, because no one's a failure for mental health stuff. But you certainly feel that way.
It can be hard. It can be tough, and
so hard.
Yeah, So in your, I guess in one way you have your art to express yourself, and then having this outlet to teach people and to show how powerful it can be is a great thing. I just wanted to say, JJ, thank you so much for coming to the sanctuary. I'm for sharing so much, and for being so vulnerable. And like when I started this show, it's like moments like this that, like episodes like this that I created this show for. So to show that, like it's okay not to be okay, and it's okay to talk about it if you want to. So really, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It was really great.